Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
I sure can.
Great. Checking audio.
My
Good morning.
apologies. Hey, good morning. My apologies if I'm a little echoey today. I am sitting in a room that is mostly empty because I just moved, and other than the boxes staring at me, there really isn't anything in this room.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
So you had to come join a mostly empty Zoom room.
That's right. It's very appropriate.
Just to make you feel like home.
I do love, though, that the essentials are here. I can do my job, my computer works, and there's coffee. So, life will go on. I just can't, make toast.
Okay, and Stefano, can you confirm when my screen is visible?
Yes, I can see it.
Hi, folks.
Morning.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Morning.
Oh.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Dave.
Yes?
Not knowing what the order in the agenda looks like right now, may I go early in the agenda, please?
Right now you are right after the action item review.
Perfect. Thank you. I've got a conflict at 7:30 that's showing up.
Okay.
And so if I can just make sure that I will make all best efforts to be clear of the meeting in that time.
Well, I had requested to move a number of things to later meetings, and so this might be a shorter meeting, so we'll see.
Okay.
We always say that, Dave.
Yeah,
It curses it every
But
time. I've tried it for the last two board meetings.
that's why I
It never
said we
works
will
out.
see.
I was just talking to Mr. Purcell as well, and he pointed out a rather embarrassing mistake on the slide, the updated slide I gave you last night, which I will call attention to.
Okay.
I have to say, I was a bit relieved that it was a mistake.
Yes. Well, yes, so was I once you pointed it out.
I mean, I'm not relieved that you make mistakes. We all make mistakes, but this, if it had been, yeah, I'll let you do
Okay,
it.
we'll get to it.
This will all become clear for folks.
I still see the participants list jumping around, and so I'll wait until it settles down for 60 seconds. I'm going to mentally do a tally to see how close we are to quorum here. I think we actually do have quorum right now, so. All right, well, I haven't seen it jump around for a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. And so, Stefano, we are recording. So I'm going to have to pull this back up in just a second here. All right, everyone, welcome to the Technical Advisory Council meeting. This meeting, if you are new here for the first time, then the first two slides are just the general ones that we put at the beginning of every deck. This one explains that we try to make this an open, welcoming meeting where everyone's inputs are valued. Every member is welcome. Observers are welcome. Every project meeting our criteria is welcome. We try to be open and transparent. This meeting is open to the public, and so we do want to make everyone be heard. If you have an opinion or feedback for the TAC, feel free to speak up. We value everybody's opinion. not just the voting members. There's TAC representatives from non-voting members. There's community members that are on here. I'm taking a little longer on this one because I see two names that I don't recognize. You may have been here before, I don't know. The second one is that this meeting is covered by the Linux Foundation's antitrust policy. If you're not familiar with it, this is the link, linuxfoundation.org antitrust-policy. Please make sure that you're familiar with it. All CCC meetings are covered by this policy. All right, with that, this is our current agenda. Since the original draft that I sent out, we've added the budget discussion here at number 4. I believe, so the chat system stuff was still on the list of action items, and so we'll get the update there. But I understand it won't be a very long discussion, so I've crossed it off on this list.
Correct. Yeah, thank you very much.
Is there any other additions? Like, I don't know, is there anything that, say, Outreach wanted to report on that's not on the agenda here that I should give time to Seth or Ava or somebody?
Why don't I could give a few updates, but it'll be quick.
All right, why don't we do that right after Stephen then?
Okay, makes sense.
Okay, and so if you can help me remember when we switched from 4 to 5 to give you time right in between there.
Sure.
Okay. Then are there any other agenda bashing?
Well, I guess we can take a minute to congratulate you on winning the election, even though it was unopposed.
You beat me to that. Commiserations or congratulations or whichever you want to accept. But,
Condolences welcome. Yes, yes.
That's the one.
Actually, the thing that I would most appreciate for thanks is more help, right? Just volunteer to do action items. And so I appreciate the vote of confidence, but I can't do it without you guys. And so thank you to all of you that have stepped up and done action items and participated in things. And please continue. And to new people, additional efforts are always welcome.
I'm happy to keep doing my sort of unofficial vice chair thing where I take the meeting. Excellent. If you're not available.
Excellent, thank you. I was wondering about that, and to everybody else, I had asked Jethro offline an email, so thank you for the response. So happy to hear that.
Hey Dave, did I miss somewhere in the email discussion we're dropping the AAA discussion today?
So Grant and folks had said that they wanted to move it to the next meeting, the December 17th meeting. And so, yes, I forgot to mention that here. It was on the agenda originally, and I guess, Grant, you're on here. You said it wouldn't be ready until the 17th. Is that right? Anything else you want to say, Grant?
Yeah, so we had we met with Ava earlier this week, have some concrete stuff to do for next steps, and Dimitri and Thomas will be ready to join this call, and I think there'll be a proposal at that point that's going to be better fleshed out.
Yeah. So Simon, at my very last slide is things that are keyed up for future ones, and you can see here's the AAA SIG proposal that they just asked yesterday to move to the 17th.
If we could have early view as possible of that, that would be great.
Yes.
I think a number of us were going to be on holiday by come 17th. I know that I'm likely to be off by then, and it's something I care quite a lot about.
I'm also likely off then.
Hold on. I'm going to call time because this is what I want to cover on slide 8, and so we'll come back to this. Unless there's somebody that's going to drop off before the end. And so that is exactly the discussion that I wanted to have at the end, but let's keep things in the same order. So we will get back to that. Don't worry about it. But if somebody's going to drop off, let me know, and I'll come to that. So, are there any other agenda bashing? Good question, Simon. Okay, then let's do the roll call of voting members, and to verify that we have quorum. And I will point out that we now have a new rep from Facebook, right? This Eric Northup, who I do not see on the call right now. Is as of November 17th, I think, is when Facebook changed their TAC rep. And so if he joins, then I will let him introduce himself. But otherwise, let's quickly run down here. Do we see Accenture Giuseppe on the call? I do not. Zongmin or somebody from Ant. I don't see anybody. I see Grant. Brandon or somebody representing Google.
I'm here. Brandon here.
Excellent. So I can't see the entire participants window all at the same time here. So thank you. Howard.
Shankaran from Facebook here.
Okay, Shankaran is here. Excellent. So yeah, I should add you. You used to be in the list of backups here. Okay. And do you know, is Eric going to be joining us today?
I don't think so. Yeah,
okay. Gotcha. Let's see, Howard or anybody from Huawei? And I do see Simon, myself, and Mike. And so that takes us to 5 between Grant, Brandon, Simon, me, and Mike. Okay, so we do have quorum. And at this point, I want to ask if there's anybody new that would like to introduce themselves. And I think I see maybe 2 names. I don't know if you've been here before. Forgive me if you have. But first, Ryan Henning. Is this your first time?
Yes, it's my first time. Also with Microsoft, I'm just kind of observing this morning.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then Shiri Band.
Hi, yes, nice to meet you. My first time. I'm replacing Yassine, who used to be joining these calls. So I'm working at CCC, startup from Switzerland.
Excellent. So CCC is one of our general members. So glad to have you on the call.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
And so are you going to be the new TAC representative from CCC? Is that what I understand?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Excellent. All right. Is there anybody else here? I think I recognize all the other names as having been here in previous meetings. Okay. Great. So our first order of business, I'm just going to go full screen here for a bit. All right. Is the approval of minutes from November 12th. So let me first ask, so this one is a question for the voting members. And so that the list of names, including Shankaran as the alternate, is there any of the voting members that need more time to review the minutes? Otherwise, I'm going to call it to a vote. Okay, hearing none. Is there anybody that would vote no, meaning you have amendments necessary, or abstain, such as you weren't there or whatever? So any no votes or abstain votes? Okay, hearing none, I will assume that everybody else, since we heard from people, had our yes votes, and then the motion passes. Let's move on. We have a long list of action items to go through, and so we'll just go through them. The first one, the budget, is actually on the agenda for the next slide, and so if you don't want to say anything about that now, we'll actually come back to it in about 3 slides.
Let's leave it, please. That was my suggestion.
Yeah. Yep. Number 2. So now we get to number 2, which is the Keystone Call.
That one's mine. Please just leave that on there so that we can have it on as a reminder.
All right.
Thank you.
Ava and Mike, any updates on the terminology proposal?
Nothing from me.
Okay. And so I'll just leave this one on here. I think I talked about I might just move this to a GitHub issue.
I think GitHub's a fine place to continue. Mike, how do you feel about that?
Not hearing anything from Mike.
I was muted. That sounds fine to me. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Stefano, can you put in the minutes for me to move this in? Because I was wondering if I should do this before the call, and I couldn't find in the minutes if we decided, or I think I asked and nobody had an opinion last time. So I may just go ahead and do that, just because this is a longer term issue.
Sure.
Or it could be a bigger issue, I should say, that may take us multiple meetings and stuff. So
sounds good.
All right. So Stephen Wally, reach out to Kat Allman regarding Lisa.
So Kat has gone dark. I'm reaching out to the executive director now.
Okay.
So leave it on.
Leave it.
And
Okay.
Because that's the easy reminder.
Okay. And now we get to the long list of Stefano's backlog. The first two have to do with the TAC white paper, which I'll actually get to on the agenda.
Sure. Yeah, as soon as we have the TAC white paper updated, I can post that. And the outreach paper has been versioned so that such that it points to the correct. Actually, it doesn't reference the TAC white paper. Its references have been updated and its version has been updated. So if we reference the outreach white paper, it is ready to be referenced.
Okay. All right. So then jumping down to action items 7 through 10, you want to walk through those and tell us if there's any updates?
Actually, let's not skip 6,
Okay, sorry.
because I did it.
Oh,
So
okay.
indeed, the scoping document has been converted to a PDF, and it can now be linked from the white papers. I
Excellent.
believe, my memory is a little fuzzy with only 1 cup of coffee, but I believe it is linked from the outreach white paper. So, but regardless,
Okay.
any white paper that references it, it's now available on our website in PDF format.
Excellent.
For the diversity efforts, I do have a link. There is a course from Linux Foundation training on diversity. And so I will send that out to the list, and we can leave this on here until I do so. For number 8, I am still going to work on the chat stuff. I had, there are several conferences in December, and between that and the holidays, and I am also sitting in a new house. So the chat one took a back seat to all that, but we will certainly revisit that, and I hope to have that all to you by the end of the year. Oh, and let's leave number 10 on there as well. That's a relatively easy lift, and I do have to go back. The webinar will be posted on a new YouTube account that is essentially for confidential computing. The Linux Foundation suggests that we use our own YouTube account rather than theirs. However, they are happy to tweet about our webinar when it gets posted on YouTube. So I will hopefully have that done by the end of the week. I will let everyone know so they can retweet what the Linux Foundation tweets about our webinar. And then I will send the TAC the questions that came from that webinar so we can discuss them in the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. Anyone have questions for Stefano? Okay, then let's move on to the budget discussion. And so, Stephen Wally, I believe you're going to lead this discussion, or Mike, who's going to run this? You will. Okay.
I've been struggling with it, so Mike's going to let me do it.
Go for it.
So, folks, this is just presenting out kind of where we are in our budget, stepping into our second year properly. And the Linux Foundation, their desire is to get everybody onto the January 1 calendar year, fiscal year kind of calendar. So we've had a few months of slush here as we gear up for this. All of our monthly budgets, as they get reported out, Stefano drops them into the wiki. So if you ever want to go take a look at the documents we're working with, they are there for all and sundry to pour over. The good news, after our first year of operations, we have a budget surplus of about $650,000 in the bank. I have a long history with technology nonprofits, so this makes me extraordinarily happy to know that we've got kind of 3/4 of a year in the bank at all times as a budget pad. You know, none of us could predict the pandemic, but I've seen economic downturns kick nonprofits in the teeth multiple times over history. So having a nice pad that looks almost like a year in the bank is a really good thing to have. The big kind of unchangeable items that we have in the budget, just to give everybody a sense of how it works, and I'm going to bring up a rough sheet in just a second, but the unmovable things are the Linux Foundation charges us 9% of our budget, 9% of our membership revenue for G&A. So that's basic accounting services, it's basic legal questions, things like that. And then we pay program manager services on the order of, it was $104K last year. But beyond that, you know, we'd really had minimal spend. You know, travel and board meetings was about 15K last year. Our sponsorships into the Linux Foundation shows that we participated in was another 13. We had about $800,000 in membership revenue last year, and we're down right now, kind of in the pandemic and people shuffling around in that first year. It looks like we'll have on the order of 700 to 750 this year. So, you know, we're down 12% in a global pandemic. So I'm pretty good with that. We're still picking up new members. Certainly new general members. We're still in discussion with our friends in Seattle to see if they would like to join. So I am still hopeful that we're going forward in a good and healthy way. Can I have the next slide, please? So here's the fun detail. And I will point out my embarrassing mistake in just a moment. This table had 3 columns when I started with it. So there was just the 2021 prelim budget. And Dave rightly asked me to throw the first year actuals up, and I did. The interesting problem with it was the numbers at the very bottom, the budget gap, would imply, because of the way that it's presented right now, that we're suddenly in the hole at the end of 2021. And we aren't. That 521 in the red was against the $600,000 budget surplus we have. So I didn't mean it to come out that way. I was cutting and pasting badly. My apologies. At the end of 2021, we should still have a pad of $600,000 in the bank. Kind of, if I could go to the next slide for just a moment.
Yeah, because just for anybody that this slide is due to, it's section 5 development. It's the tax area. So
we're gonna come back and discuss that. But I just wanted to give you kind of a quick overview of roughly kind of what the 2021 proposed budget looks like. So all the normal business of running this nonprofit are basically the same as last year. You know, we've put a stake in the ground. We can't change our G&A, but there's the 9% G&A. There's the program management budget. There'll be a little bit of travel. We earmark on the order of, we had $40,000 earmarked for legal last year for things like filing trademarks, if we had to deal with any of the encryption government filings, things like that. Face-to-face board meetings invariably cost between $5,000 and $10,000. So that all basically stays the same in the budget. Marketing, it basically we seem to be getting good service out of the Linux Foundation for $15,000 a year for the creative services. And then we've got an events budget there. So hopefully as we come out of the pandemic, we can do something appropriate with that. We've earmarked the $60,000 for the total addressable market study. And I'm assuming Seth will speak in a little more detail to that. But it is basically, we guessed right. Seth here said it might cost as much as 60, maybe even more. We put 60 in the budget and we got confirmation yesterday that that's going to cost us 60. And then I've left a budget item in there of 40,000 for PR work from Rethink It. That's Jen Clower's company. Jen Clower's the person who runs a small PR firm for the Linux Foundation, as her primary client. She agreed to do piecework for us. Jen normally does a monthly retainer. Instead, the outreach committee basically convinced her that we really didn't need her services at all. Which brings us to the development budget, where we'll come back to the other page. But the rough thing that I've got in there, and Dave, it's probably appropriate to go back one slide. So if you come all the way down to section 5, development, essentially one of our primary goals, and something that we need to get a good grip on this year, is to provide services to the projects that are under our umbrella. And we'll define what that menu looks like. That's part of the job of the TAC, but it's to provide services to projects so they can grow. And in doing that, we have 8 projects on the books right now that the TAC has approved. I put a ballpark hand wave of 6 more in the coming year. And then I said, okay, $20,000 per project. That was where this number has come from. It's basically, there's $280,000 in the budget that the TAC can allot to projects. And I've, it's a rough number of 14 times 20.
You're saying that's how you calculated the number, but
That's
it's
how I
up to-
calculated the
But
number.
it is up to the TAC. The governing board delegates to the TAC however it wants to spend that 280. So it doesn't mean that every project gets exactly the same amount, right? We could do different amounts based on asks or based on level or based on
Correct.
whatever else we want, whatever criteria. That's up to the TAC.
That is exactly correct. You know, it's basically, I'm suggesting in this budget for 2021 that the TAC has $280,000 to spend on the projects.
Yeah.
In
And some of
however it sees fit.
Yeah. And it does, we also have the liberty of saying there might be some spends that are not project specific, right? If there are things that aid, collaboration or something like that, then that would still come out of there. So again, that doesn't mean necessarily every project gets 20K. That's not what that means. That's just, you're explaining that's how you came up with the number, and then the TAC, we are free to come up with whatever allocation we want.
Absolutely correct. To give you a rough sense for it, the number beside that for first year actual says $0. It actually wasn't $0. It was 500 and change. That was like the Zoom account that OE is using.
Thank you. That was one of my questions. Yeah.
Yep. And it's, we have not spent money. We are, as we wrestle to get ourselves organized here, we have not been spending money. But when you look at the kinds of money we might spend, whether it was providing testing services or hosting services, those things tend to be fairly inexpensive, on the order of a few $100s. I think $450 a month is one of the bigger charges that we pay back to the Linux Foundation for all of the basic web support. It can get expensive. One of the things that the Linux Foundation shoves into the budget when they hand you your first prototype budget is on the order of $40,000 a year for license compliance scanning of source code. Now, for the projects that we have, we've said we're not interested. That'll be an ongoing debate. We're certainly not paying $40,000 per project for that kind of money. But it's one of those things where, you've got a lot of flexibility here to spend the money as you see fit. The line item above it, consortium IT services and collab tools, we pay the Linux Foundation about $6,000 a year, $5,000 a year for all of the basic services, IT infrastructure type stuffs, the web hosting, and keeping the site patched, and our Jira. Sorry, a spelling mistake there. That's the Jira account and our groups.io and things.
And obviously, we also consume some of the LF Creative budget, and that's the top line item, right? That's
but that's not coming out of your budget right now.
Right. We get some benefits without being charged to our budget because it's like a retainer, right?
Yep.
What are we using Jira for?
We're not. Are we?
I believe that's a general cost. I don't believe we're using Jira for anything, Stefano.
I thought it was part of a bundle, and we're just not using that element of the bundle, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So what that line item speaks to is there's a system that I use to administer the website and to do various other technical things. Jira is a possibility on there, along with Confluence and a bunch of other things, but $5,000 is not including Jira there. You would see a 1 to the left of the 5 if Jira was in our system.
Fair enough.
So yeah, Jira is an option, as is Confluence. And the AWS, there are a bunch of options we can have, and all of them are currently turned off except for the basics I need to make the website work and such.
Cool, thanks.
So Stefano, when in the outreach meeting, you'd reported that if for the 2021, if there were multiple candidates that you were considering moving to a different voting system rather than the Condorcet one that we used for this year, if you were to do that, and I'm not trying to call that to a vote, but would there be a cost for it? And the real question is, whose budget would that be under? Would that be under staff, travel, and board, or where would that go if there were a cost?
There would be a cost. It's called OPA vote, OPA vote. And it has a much nicer interface and voting system, not to come down on Cornell. They created a very nice system that everyone can use for free. but OpaVote is a little bit more professional looking. And so if we did have lots of candidates and we were voting on that sort of thing, I would recommend OpaVote. It's really nice. And I think the cost there is pretty low too.
You would use the same system for all 3 votes between board, outreach, and TAC, is that right? And so
Yeah,
it would
correct.
not come on, if you were to do that for, say, the board or the outreach, we would not again be charged. It wouldn't be part of our budget anyway. So it would be an ask to the board then, is my guess, and not an ask to the TAC or the outreach.
Right, correct.
Okay.
Right. That to me is, kind of part of our normal business of running the nonprofit.
Yeah.
Right. And the OpaVote is not a subscription. It's something that you would pay per vote. So I think it's something like, I forget exactly how much, but I think it's something to the effect of $10 per voter. So it's not terribly expensive and a much nicer interface. And for those of you who have used the Cornell system, it is very sort of basic, shall we say.
Okay.
I would describe it as very techie friendly. I love it.
Indeed, it is. Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
So can I have the, if you could advance 2 slides, please.
Well, I had a question for you, unless it's
okay,
about
please.
the licensing. I had a follow-up question about the licensing stuff that you talked about.
Yep.
You talked about the license scan stuff was something like 40K per project. What is the definition of project in the 40K sense?
So that's very ambiguous right now, and because we turned it all off, I have not pursued it with them at all.
Because the reason I ask is the CCC a project?
I would probably argue it at that level because we would be using so little of it. At this point in history, they have produced a report for the OESDK, and I believe they've produced a report for NARCS. And I had the discussion with Mike, and he said that it wasn't really a helpful report.
No, the reason that I ask, well, 2 reasons, two things that lead into my question. One is because we have multiple definitions of project right now. There's the LF Projects LLC, which has which is the legal entity. That's the the technical charter and things. So like NARCS is a project with a capital P, right? Open Enclave is a project with a capital P. There's other informal definitions, like some people might call each GitHub repo a lowercase p project. And so there's some informal usages that have come up on the list and meetings where people have had that definition. And then the legal entity that's the CCC, I thought was an Linux Foundation project. And so if you could argue that it's 40K for the CCC as a whole, and you had 14 projects, then it starts to become interesting, because even if 2 or 3 projects don't use it, 2 or 3 other ones might, and if it's amortized across all of them, and so a total of 40K out of 280 is not out of the question.
It's not out of the question. It's something that I think a reasonable thing, and please put the action on me to contact the appropriate person at the Linux Foundation to actually kind of take us through an in-depth discussion one day in the TAC sometime next year. Early in the year, and in one of the January meetings. I realized there could be more urgent business with FOSDEM and things like that. But
I would say I don't think NARCS has had a report from them.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Well, I think the things like NARCS fall into the least risk category, because all of the NARCS code, from my understanding, you correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, all the NARCS code was written by the same organization that has its own legal department. Okay.
Yeah.
If you look at projects that come from the community, whether it's Keystone, Graphene, whatever, that would be a collection of people from various universities and things, there's much less legal oversight, and so the risk is higher for those.
Yep, absolutely fair comment. So let me organize a presentation January, February timeframe from the Linux Foundation on just, we'll dig down into this a little further.
Okay. Got it. As long as you've captured that in the minutes, Stefano, then you said you wanted to go to this slide?
This slide. So, and so we've got minimal overhead that we're paying on a monthly basis for the basic, foundational website tooling infrastructure kind of thing. What budget subcommittee wants to basically, there are still an ongoing discussion that needs to be finished with the accounting folks so that we can track the per project as we define them in the TAC charges coming in, so that I could give you, kind of as a brief update each month, or put it on a place that's easy to access in the website, of how much money we are actually spending per project in the coming year, as you start to distribute that 280 across projects. So that's kind of a going forward kind of thing. The next steps, the board, we should approve this budget for 2021 going forward in the December board meeting. And so if you've got real concerns or real discussion, then I'd need to know about it sooner rather than later. But this is what I would like to put in kind of in for a board vote in a couple of weeks' time.
One of the things for everybody else that I had asked Stephen is the spreadsheet that we saw on the screen was the level of granularity that the governing board sees, right? But out of there, that line items for the TAC, we have discretion as to how we allocate that within the TAC. And I'd ask, can we get something similar that's the blow up of that, like per project? Maybe there's some cross project stuff that might have a budget. If we start having SIGs, maybe SIGs have a budget or whatever. We need something that's finer grain at the TAC level, that's more fine grain line items and things. And so that's what we're talking about in this last one. And so that might be reviewed by us, but not necessarily visible at the board level unless they ask. So just
and to give the TAC a general sense here. So as you see, like we spent no money basically last year on the projects. We had earmarked, some money that was potentially to be spent on things that we didn't spend it on in the TAC. It's a very similar situation to what happened in Outreach. So I'm basically,
we did have votes to actually allocate some funds. You mentioned the Zoom account. We had a couple of other things that said, if people were to ask for, chat systems and so on, we were just lucky that both NARCS and Open Enclave had donations from people that they ended up getting something that our cost was zero for. That might not be the case in the future for other projects, right? But at least we did have votes to allocate funds. We just got lucky for everything except for one so far.
And the kind of the intention I have here from a budget subcommittee perspective and from a board perspective is, if you're fine with this allocation going into 2021, and remember, this is always, an experiment, that we basically, once the board's approved this, that money is that 280 is basically yours to spend on projects appropriately. If there was a big ask from something else that the TAC wanted to do, that I would ask you to bring to the board, because you're spending outside of the budget that was planned. But you don't need to be coming to the board after we approve this budget. You've got 280 to spend on projects. I'll certainly, the budget subcommittee will certainly see what's being spent as money goes out, but for the TAC to simply approve within, any expense within the budget, you're simply going to direct Stefano to go
so the
go make it
general
happen.
principle being that the TAC gets an allocation, and as long as it spends within that on stuff that it has the authority to decide on, that's pretty cool.
Yep.
Get something done.
That's what we'd like to enable.
And by the way, if you're new here for the first time, right, just make sure everybody understands, Stephen Wally is the chair of the governing board, and Mike Purcell is the treasurer. And so there are two of the members of the budget subcommittee. Mike, also being a TAC member, is the person on the TAC who's over the budget, as well as the person on the governing board that's over the budget. He actually has multiple hats. So
just to confuse matters further.
If you're new, that's who's talking. So just to make everybody feel
so between Mike and I mean, the point is to make this flow better.
Then he shows me stuff and says, "Is this okay?" For which I'm very grateful. So
sorry, that was just my public service announcement. I periodically do things to try to make everybody feel welcome. If you're new here, right, I want to make sure you understand you're on the same page as everybody else. So And your input is value. Anybody have feedback? Because this is not a decision of the TAC, this is a decision of the board. But if we have advice for the board, if there's any feedback that we have, this is a good time to speak up. Otherwise, if this looks good, we will say, yes, board, this would be great if you gave us this.
I will send email to the TAC one more time and kind of as I prep for the board meeting to see if there's any further discussion or concerns or questions. But at this point, that's kind of the money that we believe that you should be allowed to spend wisely this year.
Okay, any other feedback or questions? If not, then thank you, Stephen and Mike, for putting this information together.
You are most welcome. I'm afraid I do need to step out to another meeting. Enjoy the rest of your time together, folks.
And
Take care.
Stephen, if you want to send me an update to the
yes, I will.
I will get that into the slide and repost it so that the archived ones don't have the error in it. So
thank you. I will get that done in the next sometime later today.
All right. I think that's the end of the budget, and if so, yeah, that's the end of the budget. In which so then it would be over to Seth if you want to give the report from outreach and any topics you guys want to talk about.
Sure. So let me start with something that was mentioned, which was the IDC TAM report. After the outreach committee meeting, so we didn't get a chance to discuss it in outreach, I got an email with a proposal from IDC, which is in line with the $60,000 cost. Their proposal was not, I mean, it included like a timeline and the cost and kind of generally what the output is, but there were a lot of kind of process and methodology details that weren't in there. So I'm going to schedule like a follow-up meeting with them and invite some other people who are interested in to ask questions. Sorry?
Did you include me? It's Mike.
Yeah, you made the original request that triggered it all, so I was planning on inviting you.
Thanks.
So, and I wanted to get kind of a little bit of a cross section of some of the different types of vendors also. So like a chip vendor, cloud vendor, and make sure we don't miss any questions. So before we kind of consider signing any agreement, I want to make sure it's pretty clear what the methodology and source of the research is going to be. So that's my next step. And, this just came in yesterday. So I asked them a bunch of preliminary questions. Just at a high level, the general timeline, if we kind of come to agreement to do it in December, would be a publication in March of 2021. So that's the kind of time, like 3 or 4 month time frame. One thing that's really good that came out of the email was that they plan to make this part of their general research, not just a commissioned piece. So they will, in 2021, if we do this project, they will publish that TAM as an IDC TAM that is available to all the IDC subscribers, not just produce the report for us and then let us distribute it. So that's good. It'll get it more visibility and make it more credible. The other point that might be of interest just at a high level is that I requested what options might be, and I asked for it for free, but they won't do it for free, of members being able to license the report for distribution themselves. Normally if you went as a vendor and tried to license an IDC report, it might be $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for a year to license a report. So I think what we're going to end up getting to is any CCC member will have the option to license it for $5,000 on top of the CCC. And if a member didn't want to license it, you can always point to the CCC distribution. But if you wanted to use it post it on your own website or use it as a content asset.
Okay, so quick question. We will see it, and we use it internally, but we can't use it for. What does that mean? Do you see?
No. This is the $60,000 includes the CCC being able to distribute it to the public.
Oh, brilliant. Okay.
And you can put it on the CCC website, but you can't put it on, say, a Red Hat website. Is that right?
And say Red Hat commission.
Yeah.
No,
So
okay,
I think,
cool.
yeah, the end outcome will likely be if you're a vendor and you don't want to pay an extra $5,000, you can reference the CCC link to that paper.
That's brilliant. Okay, that's fine. I just wasn't sure what licensing meant in this context specifically.
So we're kind of getting like a volume discount on the members being able to license it.
But does that mean that we can't make it available to the public? This goes, say, in our internal share only to
No.
we can make it be public.
Yeah, it will be public regardless of the option for other vendors to do it. It's just the vendors can put it on their own websites if they pay the license fee.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay.
So I had a question about the scoping, since you talked about how you were reviewing the potential scoping and stuff, and you mentioned cloud and chip and so on. Would the scope also include non-cloud uses like Edge? I'm just thinking about the original Gartner definition versus our updated.
I have almost zero information on what the scoping is. That's why the purpose of the follow-up meeting.
I would say if we can get it for the same price, it would be good to have both cloud and non-cloud usages covered in the same study.
In the initial discussion, I asked for it to include, cloud instances, chip components, hardware components and software components, but kind of the whole triangle of what we presented in the past, right? They were very comfortable doing the chip part of it because they count chips already. They were less comfortable with the cloud instances. So I think that's the main purpose of meeting, is to kind of get the scoping documented to include as much as we can.
So here's an example of something that I want to know whether it would be included in scope, right? One of the advertised users using organizations of the Open Enclave SDK is Scaleless Trustbox, which is an Edge router. They have a home version, they have a industrial version. The home version was the one that won the award at CES 2019. The industrial version was announced at the Hanover Messe Fair in 2019. And so they make hardware that includes the SDK in it, as part of the not that the user necessarily sees it, but it's built on top of trusted firmware and OESDK and stuff that has a trust execution environment for running enclaves in routers. And so would that be something that they would be counting, given that that's public and advertised and winning awards and stuff in 2019 and so on? It's not like it's secret, and it's easy to get some numbers and stuff maybe because it's that public. But is that something that would be covered in their study?
Yeah, so those are the types of questions we want to ask and get written down in the agreement.
Because I imagine there's more across all the projects that are in here now and the industry that's out there, whether we have CCC members sitting in that category or just members sitting in providers to such customers. I don't know.
Fortanix has a similar thing, right? We have
there you go.
appliance.
That's true. Yeah, you guys are in that category too for Edge stuff.
I mean, that's one of the categories we're in, but I mean, I imagine there's also, some mobile devices and things that have different, kinds of, the scope is important, is very important.
The reason that I ask is I think it would be odd for the CCC to publish, here's the TAM, and the TAM only covers cloud stuff, right? That would be inconsistent with the definition. And so I want to make sure people don't start repeating that same old Gartner definition based on looking at the TAM study.
Yeah, so I provided them with our white paper as guidance of like what to start with from a scope perspective, but I want to hear them say how they're going to count everything before we sign anything.
Sounds good.
So I'll if you have specific questions like that, send them to me. I'll maybe build a Google Doc or something with a list of all the questions. So even people who don't attend the meeting can make sure we get a question asked about the scope and that it's, you know, reflected. I don't know what their answer will be. They might say, hey, we can't count that, or, you know, we need information from you to be able to count that. One of the things we offered was that, you know, they might be able to do interviews with each like CCC member and beyond the CCC members to like get one-on-one, get information from the vendors. So it doesn't have to be, you know, done through the CCC or exposed to any of their competitors that are in the CCC. So like vendors one-on-one could get interviewed by IDC, which is what they often do, right? They send out surveys to the vendors of like, how many are you selling of XYZ widget, right? And that's part of their counting process. So
I think that's a great thing, because out of the like the cloud vendors and the chip vendors, if you only looked at that, you'd only be pretty much looking at the premium members, right? With maybe one or two exceptions, but whereas all the other stuff would be in the general members, and being able to reach out to all the general members, I think here would be important.
Yes, I think the two big topics are scope and then methodology for collecting the information. I also asked some questions like around whether we could, there's a white paper that comes with it. So there's kind of the TAM, which is, you know, a table and a chart, right? And then, you know, it'll also include like a 10-page white paper, which describes, you know, confidential computing. And I asked about having, let's say like examples of end users built into that white paper. You know, maybe some representative ones for the different use cases, which could tie in with the end user council work.
Yeah, just a random thought occurs to me that one other constituency we might want to consider, given that we've got lots of startups who are particularly general members, so getting some of their investors will probably have views on this, and it might be worth trying to corral them as well.
Yeah, I mean, definitely our investors would be interested. But yeah, I think, you know, I'll send out an email. I'll kind of like make the questions in a Google document and then, you know, solicit input on what we want to ask IDC before or what we want to get included in the scope. Okay, that's the IDC thing. Any other questions on that? I'll report back on it as we progress, and we'll certainly talk about it in the outreach meetings as well.
Thanks, good.
Yep.
Okay. The next thing I want to discuss, I put a link in the chat, and I just sent out an email to the TAC and outreach list. In the outreach meeting yesterday, we reviewed a process for submitting and building a webinar calendar. So previously, I think we've talked in the TAC and outreach about that, you know, we did our first webinar on November 10th. It, you know, went well. So we want to try and have a monthly cadence of CCC webinars. So we talked about some topics, and I created that Google document that's in the chat to provide some guidelines for submission, a process, and a template for how you would submit a webinar for being added to the calendar. And we would love to get you know, several submissions, and the earlier the better. Since
is there anything you want to share on the screen, or is?
Yeah, I mean, I can share the document just to talk through it. I don't want to go through the whole thing because that'll take a while, but I'll show you the sections just to give people an idea. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so there's a calendar at the top. The only one we've done, or, you know, we haven't approved, we've done the one that was done on the 10th. You know, basically it'll get added to the calendar after the submission process is completed and outreach has reviewed the submission and approved it. So, you know, we'd like to add one for January. I mentioned in the email that I sent out that we had previously talked, and I think, you know, we kind of wanted to invite NARCs to do one since it's kind of coming pretty quickly and there's material there already.
Yeah, and I spoke to Ben, and we're very happy to do that. So put us down.
Okay. So, I'll work with Ben, but if he can go through and submit this, that would be great, because
Got it.
you can be the first test case of the process. So here's some general guidelines. We want it to be educational. We need a minimum of 6 weeks advance notice. So there's kind of a little timeline I added here. Dave, that was your kind of comment on.
Yep, this is good.
Give a little work back calendar. Basically, there's a template in this document that is based on what I needed to create when we did the first webinar. So the title, abstract, speakers, social posts, and email invite are kind of the main part of that. So the idea is just to fill that template out by adding it to the end of this Google document, and then notify me, and I'll put it on the agenda for the next outreach committee meeting. And then, if you can attend, that'd be good for you to kind of present it, whoever the submitter is. If you can't attend, we'll just review the written submission, and then we'll approve it, put it on the calendar, and work with Stefano to get all the assets created, like the landing page and email invite and social posts that were from the submission. And then it'll be kind of the submitter's responsibility to create the content and work with Stefano to do kind of a dry run and all of that. So, and then the webinar will get posted to the CCC webpage on the YouTube channel that Stefano mentioned is getting created. Any questions?
I
Okay.
think we can want to encourage webinar submissions from projects. Although I think before we said that our policy was we only wanted to actually have the webinar after the board vote. And so we got a bunch of projects in the pipeline right now, and only the ones that have finished the pipeline should be the ones that we're pulling the webinars, and encourage everybody else to finish the pipeline before the
So I think we'd like to have each accepted project do
Exactly.
a webinar at some point.
Yeah. So probably the next ones for projects after NARCs would probably be Open Enclave, and I think Vera Cruz, and I think other ones are still in the middle of the pipeline, right?
And I think it would be good to mix like an independent of a project educational technical topic in there with, so it's not just like a series of projects. So, we had talked about maybe attestation, or maybe a little bit deeper dive from the TAC white paper content, something like that would be.
Yeah, I like what Simon just said about turning the white paper into a webinar. And also, if we do start this AAA SIG, certainly webinar around that, there's a lot to be said for, I think.
Yeah, I think that was definitely one of the early ideas was let's just do the TAC white paper as a webinar. Although we did cover some of that ground in the first webinar, which is why we thought maybe NARCs would be a good next one, and then maybe go back to the TAC white paper or the attestation SIG, content or.
Yeah, I think attestation came up because we said, well, let's look at the TAC white paper. A bunch of the stuff was covered in the first webinar. What parts of the TAC white paper were not covered in there? Well, there's an attestation section that wasn't covered in there, and so that's why attestation got on the list, just because of it's part of the TAC white paper that we wrote up content for that was not in the first CCC webinar.
Yeah, and let me just point out that it's kind of like 6 to 8 week, process to do one. So, and we, let's say we get the NARCs one for January 12th, going. It would be good to get like 2 or 3 going, so that we have, an actual like couple months in advance, since it, we're trying to do the monthly, but there's a kind of a 2-month process.
So let me ask you this, Seth. What percentage of the months do you expect to have topics that come from the TAC?
I would expect a majority of the topics to come from the TAC or projects.
So like 80%, 90%?
Yeah.
So like on the
average, I think the first one was kind of like the first one was kind of like an overview primer that was based on the outreach white paper. So I would want to kind of get more technical over time, and kind of build a list of on-demand webinars that go deeper and deeper, cover all the projects, you know, maybe start to get into implementation details, or you know, things about kind of real world use cases, things like that. So yeah, I think leaning towards mostly technical content or project content. Okay. Ava, I think you had mentioned maybe giving an update on FOSDEM. Do we want to do that before we move on from the outreach updates?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure. So Seth, I think you're on the same email thread that I'm on.
I am, but I haven't paid that much attention to it, so it's probably better if you give the.
Okay, happily. The short version is the FOSDEM dev room for hardware-based confidential computing got approved again. So yay, fantastic. Because it's online, you know, we have, in theory, a half day, but we can easily overflow that into a day or more, depending on how many submissions we get. It looks like Joe is, you know, happy to run with this. There wasn't a specific request for us to, you know, the TAC or outreach to do anything right now, other than review the CFP proposal. Joe is planning to post the proposal through the FOSDEM process the end of this week, so tomorrow. And then the tentative schedule.
Actually, he already posted the CFP. I just saw an email to the Intel SGX mailing list. So
there we go.
I guess
It's already
send it
out.
out to TAC as well.
Okay. And then I guess the timeline, based on the last email I read, possibly now out of date, is CFPs through December 24th, announcements December 31st. And then there's the first 2 weeks of January for speakers to record and upload, and then a couple weeks for outreach committee and whoever else to help, you know, process videos, review them, fix anything, ask for changes if we need to. It's part of the joy of doing online events, is all of that behind the scenes work. I think that's really a space where outreach can either step in to help or find people from our respective companies to step in and help at that point in time. And then during the event itself, I don't know what that'll look like yet. But yeah, we're a go. It's awesome.
Great.
Ava, can you just confirm that FOSDEM is 100% virtual this year?
Correct. 100% virtual, nothing in person. I don't know the details yet of what their platform will look like, though.
Is it all pre-recorded? Or is it live?
I don't know.
The talks are pre-recorded, and then there's a live Q&A session.
Okay.
Thanks, Jethro.
Okay, any questions from Ava? Do we have, let's see, I think you posted something into the chat. Is there a link to more information, or do you want to post an email or something to the TAC list, or did you already? I don't remember. Just for the latest update.
I did not, since I was just reading Joe's email this morning before this call.
Because I think here, this is one that we want to invite projects to participate in, right?
Absolutely.
So how do we do that invite? Because a bunch of the projects are not on this call, is why I'm asking. It's not necessarily just a question for you, Ava, it's a question for the entire room. So you and anybody else.
Well, there's two ways. One is via the FOSDEM mailing list, which presumably exists, and the other is via the TAC mailing list and via the GB as well, and outreach. I think we need to do all of those.
Stefano
and social media.
Stefano, do we know whether the TAC mailing list actually includes representatives from all of the projects that are in the pipeline?
No, I don't believe it does. One thing we could do is we could use the announcement mailing list, which includes everyone who's a member of CCC.
Okay.
So assumedly some of the projects would have representatives there.
Seems appropriate to me.
Yep, I agree.
Yep. Agreed.
Okay, so who wants to take the action item to send email to their
projects?
Sorry, go ahead, Jethro.
Should we create a new mailing list for that, like has all the representatives from all the projects?
I've been encouraging them to use the announcement mailing list. Lots of projects or membership are a little hesitant to add another mailing list to their life, specifically because a lot of them use them for development, and so they expect them to be quite chatty. That's why I've tried to keep the announcement mailing list very quiet, so that it only actually bugs folks when something important is happening. But I would be. It's very easy to create a mailing list if that's something that folks think would be valuable.
I think the project collaboration discussion is separate. I think for getting folks aware of this event and inviting them to the projects to submit to it, I think that should be on the announce. It is generally, for everybody good info to have. And I would suggest it come from one of the body leads, whether that's Seth or Dave or Stefano.
Did you say that there's already something posted to the TAC list?
I don't think so.
I didn't
That's
say
why I
this,
was
but
asking.
I'm
That's why I
checking
was
right now,
asking. Yeah. So I guess there's an implied question there is, well, first, permission-wise, who's authorized to post to that list, Stefano? Are all of us authorized, or is sort of that?
No, it's an announcement list, which generally means only moderators can post.
Okay, and who's a moderator right now?
I believe the chairs and myself.
Am I a moderator?
Yes.
Okay, so then, all right, so then all three of us are legal. Should we have the announcement come from Stefano, Seth, or me? Anybody care? If somebody else gives the content, I don't care whether it's me or somebody else. So, but
I think it should be Dave.
Okay. So Ava, if you want to send it, if you want to ghostwrite the blurb, I am happy to send it. If you can't, let me know. But you seem to be the authority, but or maybe between you and Jethro, either one of you could do it. So
yeah, I'm only raising the point because I saw the email this morning and think it's an important thing. But I don't feel like
I
I'm
think
an authority
Ben
on
Fish has been quite involved, so you can I'd use him, leverage him.
Either that, or I would be happy if Jethro wanted to ghostwrite it, since you've been involved with it before. So
yeah, sure. I mean, I would probably just take Joe's announcement and modify it a bit.
Do you have time to do that?
Yeah, sure.
If you want to do that and work with Ben or whatever, then I can assign you the action item. But if I remember the timeline, we wanted to get out an announcement this month. The timeline that David just went through.
Not just this month, but this week.
This week, yeah, yes. Thank you for the reminder. Is that something you can do this week, Jethro?
Yeah, I'll do it today.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Right. Because the CFP is up already, so we want people to be submitting in the next 2 weeks. Once the submission deadline closes, then it's up to us to review it.
Yeah, sounds good. And then Stefano, if you can give me the email address to send to, you can either email it or just post it into the chat or whatever.
Sure, it'll be in the minutes, but I'll send it to you separately as well.
Okay, cool. I'm trying to avoid giving you a bunch of new action items, given that you're just moved and you have a backlog of action items. And so,
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions on FOSDEM or comments on that, or questions for Ava? Okay. Then let's move on to the next item on the agenda. Thank you, Ava. Reshare my screen here so I can get back to the slides. Okay. All right. Can people see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, let me get back to where we were. So you should see the slide that says TAC white paper status. Is that right? Somebody confirm you can see the right slide?
Confirm.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so TAC white paper status. Last meeting, we briefly went through Steve Riley's comments and said we need to make updates in the TAC white paper. And you heard Stefano mentioning earlier that we need to get an update there that references the right, links, and we had the scoping and so on. So I'm going to flip over to my browser here is the Google Doc. Hopefully people can see this. And so I'm going to go through the changes that have been made, and we can either accept or defer. And I have not done all of the open things. There's still an open set of questions that we can, again, choose to do something on or just defer until later. So the first one, we had a discussion about the title. In the last minutes, this was the working title that we were changing it to. The one before this, the title was Confidential Computing Deep Dive V1.0.
Sorry, I can only see the slide which says 5 TAC paper, white papers.
Thank you for letting me know. I will stop share and reshare. I must have shared app instead of desktops. Let me retry that again. Maybe, do I have, just making sure I have the right, here. Let's try again. Share screen. Okay. And now I'm going to try to flip back to the web page and let me know if you can see the TAC white paper.
Yes, now can see that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. So as I was saying, what it used to have as our title was this, Confidential Computing Deep Dive V1.0. And we said that one was the placeholder, and we had a couple different titles. This was the last working title that we had, a Technical Analysis of Confidential Computing V1.1. People okay with that? I'm going to keep going if you want to speak up and suggest an alternate. We still have an open suggestion here from Thomas Harjono that I have not done. I couldn't figure out how to do that, and Thomas hasn't been back on the call since then. But if somebody else wants to do something, feel free. But otherwise, I'm going to propose that we keep leaving this one open. Okay, so we had discussions of Steve Riley's feedback on this one. His actual comments are in this other doc, which is linked to in previous minutes and agenda slides and so on. And so, and in here, you can see this is Seth's annotating during the meeting with Steve, the short version of his comments. And then you'll see what I've tried to do based on that and the discussion we had last meeting. This notion of, he wanted this to be more prominent that you still have to trust the hardware, right? Because this is about why is hardware necessary, and talks about everybody else that you can remove. He said it would be clear if you still stated that you still require trust in the hardware, that you can't remove that. And so I've tried to replace with a minimum of dependencies with this other sentence here.
So I'm not sure I agree with the other sentence, and at least two.
Well, would you like to wordsmith or revert? Because we could always choose to say we're not going to address it this time. So.
I don't like either, but I prefer to revert, I think, and then work on another time.
Okay.
And I think that has strong views.
Well, I think it's correct, but I'd be interested to know why you don't think it's correct. But I have no objection to.
So very briefly, I think you need to trust some firmware that comes with it, and I'm not sure you need to trust the authorized administrators, depending on the use case.
Okay, we can talk about that more.
And if you do, then I'm not sure what you mean by an authorized administrator, which is all fun. You know, it's just.
The word authorized is saying whoever is, presumably there is some human on the planet that is authorized to have policy that has to do, that has some influence. So, for example, who authorizes how are patch updates authorized, or is the thing never patchable? Right? Hopefully, it's patchable, and if it's patchable, who has the authority to do that? Whoever has the authority to do that isn't authorized.
I'm not sure you necessarily even need to trust those people, depending on exactly what your trust model is. And this is part of the problem is that we don't discuss what trust is here. So someone should write a book about
that. Anybody else have an opinion? Because I guess Mike's proposal is, at least for this rev, no change. In other words, punt the problem down the road to V1.2 or something. Anybody else have an opinion? That the lack of consensus means we keep it the same, right? Because we already had consensus on the old text, right? So that's the default answer, right? We need consensus to make any changes. So, all right. So I don't remember.
So I can just note that 2.2 will not be included in the newest rev, and so you can leave this here so the conversation can continue.
Gotcha. That's what I was going to ask: is how do I annotate that without losing the discussion?
Yeah, just simply leave it, and I've noted in the minutes 2.2 will be discussed further for version 1.2, and Yeah, when I go to give these updates to creative, I won't include the 2.2 changes.
I have not proposed a change here. I couldn't come up with what a good change would be that would be more straightforward than less straightforward. He says there's a counter argument here that we should address, and that's a deeper discussion that I didn't want to get into in this simple update. The deeper discussion is that there's a trade-off here, right? Because if your root of trust is purely hardware-based, which is more secure, of course, you can't rev the hardware very easily, but you can rev the software. And so the more stuff you put in software, the more updatable you are. So what's the mutable versus immutable part?
Now, I've got some thoughts around here again. I think let's put this all as part of that discussion. There are stories we can weave around there, which I think will help.
Right, but we're not going to do it in this. Right now, we're trying to get an update out that fixes, the title and the links and stuff. And so it's whatever the easiest, straightforward updates are. We want to get that to be done now, like by the end of this meeting, so we can hand it to LF Creative to go put up on the website. So I'm going to keep going, but that's one that does require some. Assuming we do want to cover this discussion, it may or may not be in this paragraph, but we do need to have something in this document somewhere. It was Steve's suggestion. All right. This one was trivial. The word TAC is never defined. Just delete the word TAC. Done. The sentence makes perfect sense. See the discussion that the word TAC is not important here. You're just noticing undefined acronym. So here, this was originally my sentence that he didn't like, where I was explaining the voiceover that goes with the top two cells in the table. And he didn't like the word vouch, because he misinterpreted what it meant. And so when I explained it out loud, he said, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. The text should just say something closer to that. And so this is my attempt to rephrase to be what we meant without using the word vouch. A typical TPM protects keys and signs or encrypts data with those keys, but by itself cannot guarantee that the data itself is correct.
Can I slight suggestion?
Yeah, please.
The data presented to it is correct.
Okay, I like that. Okay, good wordsmith. Okay. Because his main point was he had misinterpreted as by vouching, it's basically saying, hey, this came from me, I've signed it, right? And so it's vouching for it in that sense. And so that's why he didn't like the word vouch. And so, all right, I think he'd be happy with that. Any other comments on that? Otherwise, I'm going to keep moving. Yep.
Sounds good.
Okay, moving on. The next one is purely grammatical. He didn't like the personification. He said confidential computing is a concept. It can't be interested in things. So he didn't like the personification phrasing. And so here's an attempt at rewording. Confidential computing is about data in use. Feel free to wordsmith.
Is concerned with.
But that confidential computing is a concept. It can't be concerned.
Yes, it can. The study of a field can be concerned with. Interest is different to concern.
Okay. If people agree that that's a good definition, I'm fine. That's actually one of the phrases that I considered and then changed it to about. So I'm happy to change it to concern because I had that originally in here. Anybody else? Data is concerned with, right? Would be the appropriate phrasing.
And you could complain that about suggests geography and location. I mean, you get to a stage where you actually have to use words. So.
Do you prefer with or about here? I prefer with grammatically, but.
Concerned with. No. I meant if you had your previous suggestion, you've just got.
Okay, so everybody's happy with this rephrasing. Okay, I keep moving. This one, he didn't like the repetition evaluation by third-party evaluation libraries. He said it read very oddly to see the same word three words apart. And so he suggested changing one of these two evaluations to the word assessment. And so I arbitrarily picked the left one if people think that that's still correct. The assessment by third-party evaluation laboratories. And his other comment was he prefers the word assessment rather than certification because it's more general to industry and standards bodies. And so I accepted his proposal there if it's okay with you guys. Hearing nothing, I'm going to keep going. Oh.
I think, yes, no, we discussed this on the call. I think he's wrong. I think it is a certification. They certify things. If it's a standards body, you certify against the standard.
Seth, are you on the call? I know Seth was here before.
I am.
Okay. Do you have any more insight on this? And I can call up his actual comment here, but if you remember our discussion here, while I do that.
I think he was arguing against, you know, there's different levels, like sometimes it's an assessment, sometimes it's a certification, if I remember correctly.
5.1.
We can have assessed or certified by.
Yeah, I think he was saying that certified was a bit strong because sometimes it's just like,
okay,
you know, either vendor assertions or, you know,
not every issuance. Well, so how about assessed or certified by? Then we cover both.
Okay, yeah, that was his literal comment there that he didn't elaborate it on verbally. So what was your suggestion, Mike?
Assessed or certified, assessment or certification.
Okay. Oh, okay, gotcha.
That should address it.
Okay. Got it. All right. Here, his suggestion was a vulnerability in the provisioning or placement of the workload. So it's not just what you put in; it's also where you put it. He thought was an important point.
Yeah. So although I hate the use of the word usually used in the cloud is scheduling.
Yeah, but if it's like you put it into a different geographical jurisdiction or something like that, then that's people wouldn't normally think of that as scheduling if you're a
I know. And for me, scheduling refers to CPU management. I think this is good. I think provisioning or placement is good.
Okay. All right. This one I did nothing about. This was he was interested for his own edification whether all of USB-C or just Thunderbolt was here, and so he said
these are exemplar gratia. We can leave them.
Yeah, that was my opinion too. Is we shouldn't make any change there. But, okay, this was actually an error in the actual published white paper. The actual published white paper, if we were to look back in the published one, this one had 6.1. This error came in because in the Google Doc, we used to have the table of contents labeled as section 1, so everything was off by 1. And when LF Creative then converted it to PDF, they updated the numbers to what's here. I've now done that in the Google Doc version to make it match, is remove the section number from table of contents. And so in the Google Doc version, this was pointing to 6.1, which is correct. And so they updated all the section numbers, but didn't update the cross-reference. And so now it's pointing to the wrong section. So this needs to be fixed. This is actually an error in the published version. Okay, I did not make any changes to this section here because it's probably more contentious that would require more discussion than we would do in this particular version. But this one, he seemed to have a thing against the hardware vendors, I guess, saying, well, if they did a better job, other people wouldn't need to mitigate it. And I said, well, our point here is that, you know, you have older hardware that you can't rev. And so what do you do if some later vulnerability is found? And so other people have to be able to step in to compensate. And so he kind of got that, but he seemed to want to say more about the responsibility of hardware vendors and side channels. But my proposal is we don't do anything in this version, so leave it as is.
Yeah, I agree. If we're going to do that, we need all of our hardware vendors to agree.
Exactly. Getting consensus on what to say there would be hard, and so that's why my proposal is no change.
Agreed.
At least for this version, right? We could talk about it again in the future if we want. So.
Yep.
All right, and I think we're down to just the links. And so in the links here, this is where we had the action items for Stefano. This is to replace this link with a pointer to the scoping document that's in PDF form. And similarly up here, we have the outreach white paper, and I think the month it needs to be updated now. Right. And so whether Stefano, you do this or LF Creative does that, we need those two references updated.
Can do. So one thing I've done is I've created links to the latest white papers so that if you go to confidential computing / I forget what I called it, honestly, but an outreach white paper latest. Do we want to remove the date from our references, or do we want to keep it there so that folks know which version we're referencing? Because if we remove it, we will never have to update this reference.
That is a good question.
And I'm just not sure how much value is provided by specifically calling out which date we're referencing.
The answer to that is if we're doing proper referencing, which we're not, then we would put a date in it. And I suggest that we do Harvard referencing and change it to Harvard referencing, in which case you put a accessed on rather than the date that it was published. Well, you put the date it's published as well, but that means you follow it and do it.
I understand Stefano's question. Tell us the rationale why you would propose locking it to a specific version. Stefano's proposal was, could we make it to be version agnostic reference to reduce
the reason is if we
time.
want to consider the possibility that people might use our references in academic publications, then having a known recognized referencing like Harvard or Chicago or one of the others seems like the right thing to do. And yes, there's always inconsistencies, but you accept those if you go to particular referencing.
Well, if your goal is to enable academic references, then we should be using DOIs, and we should generate a DOI for CCC documents.
I agree with that as well.
So unrelated to the content of this document, I would like to propose, based on this discussion that Mike and I were just having, that we investigate getting a DOI for the CCC to be able to use.
That's not a DUI, everyone, just
DOI, right? DOI.
Yeah.
It's what academic references use, and you can create URIs as a DOI colon that is the location independent identifier. And often, if I were to look at, say, a recent IETF RFC or something like that, all RFCs get DOIs for exactly the same reason.
Anything in JSTOR, something like that. Yeah, they've all got DOIs.
Yeah. All right. So if you can put that as an action item, maybe for me, Stefano. But then I don't know if there's some budget ask that would be necessary there.
But we should find out if the LF has done this before. You'd expect they have.
Yeah, and I would expect the same thing. We would want a DOI instance for, a URI, meaning when we say a DOI, each document gets its own DOI, which is a string, just like this is a URI, right? Each of these HTTPS colons is a URI. A DOI is another one of these, right? Another unique identifier. We'd want them to apply to outreach as well for the outreach white paper and so on to be able to have a DOI. And so that means it'd probably be an ask at the board level and not at the TAC. And if there is a cost for it, which I don't know, but I can help investigate that.
That sounds great to me. I'll add that action item. And yeah, I think.
But I don't think that should affect the content of this version of the document.
Correct. Yes.
Although some of these actually do have DOIs, some of these references, not all of these, like number 1 doesn't have a DOI, but some of these actually do have DOIs that we could list in there, either in this version or the next version. So I'm going to say the next version since we're not reviewing it right now, and I want to ship this off to LF Creative this week. So, meaning I want Stefano, you to be able to say after this call, here's the snapshot, go and do the work. So, so that's why I do want an answer to the question you were asking about, should we have a month in the outreach reference or not? Mike, your proposal is yes. Keep the month.
No, my proposal is, if this is a particular referencing style, it's one I don't recognize. But then again, I only used a couple of them. If it is, then we should stick with that.
I had a bias. I think I started the references section. This is the reference style that's used by the IETF. If you look in any of these RFC references.
In which case, we should stick with that. We shouldn't just abandon them because it's a pain.
It looks like the IEEE standard.
Yeah.
For references.
Just the syntax style where you have a period after the month and then you have a potential URI after that, if there is one, which there is in all of these. That is the literal style used in RFCs. And since I've written a bunch of those, this is the style I was the most familiar with, and so this is the one that I used. So
well, that's fine. In which case, we should stick with it for all of it, I think.
All right, then we should keep the month in there for this version and just have Stefano or LF Creative update the month to be whatever the month of the updated outreach version was. All right, is there anything else? Because I would like the conclusion of this discussion to be Action item, Stefano, please make this so, run it through the LF Creative and get the website updated based on the content that's in here right now. Modulo, that section that you annotated was not going to be updated. Okay.
I've given myself that action item as well as checking with the LF to see if a DOI has been provided for other white papers.
Okay.
And Dave, I've given you the action item to just look into the DOI in general.
Yep, that's fine. And again, the DOI stuff should not affect this version. They
Correct.
should just do the work and get it up. So, okay, moving on. Let's see. The chat system was deferred. All right, so GitHub issues. There's one issue ready to discuss here. So we're down to the ending of the slides here. So PR 69, and I saw Mike, you'd already looked at this one, if I remember right.
I can't remember which ones I've looked at, but possibly, sorry.
I thought I had it open here, but apparently I don't. Oh, I think. All right. So the issue number was 50, and issue number, I'm just going to refresh here. The PR does not address everything that's in issue number 50. It's like half of 50.
Yeah,
it does address what the title is. The title is, Simon originally filed this one, which was in our progression policy and incubation graduation stages. It talks about a growth plan. It actually talks about growth plan and growth goals, but it doesn't actually ever define those terms and say what that is. Okay, and so that's what the issue was filed as. There's been a bunch of other discussion here about what things are good to be put in there and about what the criteria for moving to graduation stage is, and great information about history and comparables of what CNCF does and so on. And I did not tackle the actual changing of the graduation stage criteria. Okay, that's the part that's actually discussed in here that is not in this PR. The definition part is what's in this PR. And so if we go to the actual PR, I think this should go to it. Otherwise, I have to click on it from the last one. Not this one. So nope, it's not that one. It is, let's go down here and click on it here, because it's easier to review in the actual paragraphs than to put it on the slides. I would have copied onto a slide, but then if you want to know any changes, it's actually easier. Okay, so consider there to be 2 slides. Okay, here's one. I'm just going to go to the viewing way. Okay, here we go. 2 slides. One slide is growth plans. One slide is growth goals. Okay, I'm just going to read this out loud because I'm basically presenting a slide here. The CCC project progression policy explains that each incubation stage project accepted by the CCC must have a growth plan to track its project toward progress towards the graduation stage, right? That was a statement of fact that was already true. This is the new definition. A growth plan is a written set of growth goals. That's a pointer to the next slide or section here. And a written set of actions intended to make forward progress towards those goals. The growth plan does not need to have a fixed timeline. That is my proposed definition. Please beat on that definition. And then lastly, something else we'd already talked about. A growth plan is reviewed when a project enters the incubation or graduation stage. Oops, that's a typo. And also as part of the project's annual review process. Okay. So are people comfortable with that definition, or would people like to see changes in that definition of what a growth plan is?
Like it.
Okay. Before I forget it, I'm just going to fix the typo here.
I'm generally in favor of that.
Okay.
I'd love to see the other sections as well.
Yep. Okay, so that is the first definition. All right, next slide. A project's growth goals. Okay, and so by the way, let me just show you the context here, because all I did was I hot linked the terms as they appeared the first time. Under the incubation stage, the term growth plan was already there. All I did was add the hot link to the previous section that we just reviewed. And under graduation stage, it used the term growth goals. And again, the words are exactly the same. All I did was I added the link. And so the link in here points to the second bit here. And also this growth goals in that definition points to this. So here's this. A project's growth goals are, at minimum, the CCC criteria for achieving graduation stage. Right? This is kind of punting to the second half that is not addressed to this PR, which I still need to do, or somebody still needs to do in a separate PR. As a bit of history, the notion of project incubation and graduation were introduced. This is the link that Ava had in the issue by OpenStack, and have since been followed by CNCF and other organizations. And again, these are the two links that Ava, you had in the issue. This is the CNCF graduation criteria link. But the exact criteria vary by organization. And here's the important bit. Objective criteria for graduation are preferred rather than subjective criteria. Additionally, any additional growth goals should be objectively measurable. Okay.
Right.
Currently, our graduation criteria are not objective. Some of them are subjective, and that's why the issue is not fully addressed. But this is
So,
the intent.
My first question is whether a project's growth goals should be necessarily for achieving graduation stage. I can consider cases with, for instance, academic or research topics where actually graduation stage is not where you want to be. But they're still made sense to be within the CCC. That makes sense?
Your question is really about the word at minimum, as you're saying, could there be something that does not even include those?
Yeah.
Another way of phrasing this is that by adopting this definition of a growth plan, we are asserting that every project must aim to reach graduation stage. And is that necessarily a goal that all projects must have?
That is a great question. The
Thank
current policy that was given to us, and again, everything after the incubation stage was not really ratified by the TAC. We said we'll leave it on the table for later review. And so the one that was given to us implies the answer is yes, but we don't actually have that as a consensus. So, good question. Comments?
I think we should discuss this at the GB. The GB or TAC question, I don't know. It's about membership, really, what you want to be.
I think the TAC should have an opinion. Even if it's reported onto the governing board, we should have a recommendation.
I agree.
So
I think sorry.
So I'm re-looking at the graduation stage definition and expectations and acceptance criteria.
Yep.
As currently in our documentation.
Let's do it.
My understanding is this was also similarly handed to us and not something that we have really iterated on yet.
That is correct. Everything in the graduation stage was handed to us, and we have not edited in any way. We've just said that we do not have consensus on this content. It is a placeholder. It is a starting point. We said it's a decent starting point, but we need to agree on it before we actually had any projects that moved to the graduation stage.
Yeah. One of the...
So here's the actual text on the screen. I don't know if I can go back to rich view and still have it be visible. No, it collapses it. I can only do it in the source view. Okay, so here's all the text that we were given as our starting point.
It's even as written, it's very subjective with words like a healthy number of committers.
Exactly. So that's why I said that is still covered by that same issue, and there's a bunch of text in a bunch of comments in the issue, and I am not going to close the issue, and I am not intending to cover it in this particular pull request.
Okay.
I'm trying to punt that as being part 2. And saying, can we agree on at least a starting point here? We can rev it once we have part 2. But I think your question, Mike, is a great one. Should we say at minimum right now and leave that as an open question covering the same issue?
You could just remove and put typically.
Okay. What do people think?
I'll make a counter proposal.
Okay.
Joining the CCC and entering the sandbox stage should not necessarily require the subjective, but the incubation stage should.
That is the context right here, which is a growth plan is reviewed when you enter the incubation stage. So all this is irrelevant for sandbox.
Then I am in favor of this.
In favor of what it says right now?
Yes. And Mike, to your question of what is this a declaration of what we do or don't want as it relates to, for example, academic projects that may never reach for that graduation stage? I think what we just uncovered, what I just realized is this doesn't exclude them. It says, an academic project is absolutely welcome. It doesn't have to think about a graduation stage.
But we shouldn't expect it to go to incubation.
Correct.
Right. It's at that point in time when
that's very helpful, and I'm happy to withdraw the comment. Okay. Thank you for helping us delve through.
Absolutely.
All right. So are there any objections to the words as phrased? If so, I will not close the issue, right? Because we still have to make our graduation criteria be objective, right? In line with this discussion here, right? But if there's no objections, then I'm going to count this as the actual vote and approval. Then I'm just going to go ahead and merge after the call here.
One small request, since we're talking about a future action to update or review the acceptance criteria. Yep. Under growth goals, could you call that out with a to-do or an action or a note, something in here that makes it explicit to a future reader who lacks our current context? Okay, sure. Let me do that right now, because again, I want to, instead of asking everybody to review this, given that we've gone through everything here, I would like to count this, since we have quorum on the call right now, to count this as the actual approval, so that people don't have to do a GitHub review if you didn't already, because it's redundant, right? And so something like to do current criteria are, sorry, I'm putting this in the wrong sentence, cancel, that goes on the previous one. This one. Okay, something like that, Ava? Yep, perfect. Okay, great. I'm just going to save those, so it's not merged, it's just saved here, so it won't be lost, and then I'll take care of that after the call. All right, thank you all for that. So that was, we talked about peer request 69 and issue number 50, which 69 is only half of. Another one that will be on future stuff is the discussion of project annual reviews. This is updating the template to say which questions are the ones that are part of the annual review and not. And we said we were going to do that after we've had 1 or 2 project reviews. And so I'm putting this on the list for January after we do the NARCS review. So we've had 2 behind us. So, all right. So with that, there's another pull request. It's not really a TAC pull request. It's a permissions pull request. It's everybody's GitHub IDs. And so on the screen here is what I believe is everybody's GitHub IDs that I know. Everybody who's a TAC representative and has a GitHub ID should be automatically added to the list of reviewers. So you should get email notifications whenever there's a pull request generated for review. Hopefully this is all correct. You can see Jinsong is replaced by Eric, and I still need to get Eric's new one. But these are the general members that have been active in meetings. There's more general members. That's a ... These are people that are generally here. So there's people that are generally here that I don't have your GitHub IDs. And I think for SciSec, Alexandra was the old one. And so now I've forgotten your name. Was this Sherry, something like that? I can't remember. I got your name wrong, I'm sorry. But this is a reminder that if this is incorrect, or if you are a general member who does not have a GitHub ID on here, please send us your GitHub ID so that you can get automatic notifications of things. You don't have to do it right now, but you could paste something in a chat or an email otherwise. But this is my official list of GitHub things. And so I do maintain this, and that's what the pull request is, and the code owner is in the directory as well. It's another place to look it up. Okay, and that takes us to the any other business discussion. So the main item to discuss on this one was the December 17th meeting and whether we would have quorum there, because Grant had asked to move the AAA SIG proposal to December 17th. Is that something we should still do? Now, let's discuss. I will very likely be offline starting on the 14th.
Ditto.
I don't think there's any urgency on this one.
And I think Simon, I think you also had an issue with December 17th. Is that right?
Simon's had to drop, I think.
Oh, you're right. He dropped.
What I would really love to do is to start a conversation around a document. You said you got a new document happening. If we could have some sort of conversation, whether on Git or Google or whatever, I would very much welcome that.
So 2 questions. One, the date, and one specifically on the proposal. So I think the question to Grant is, when do you think you can have the updated proposal posted to the list, independent of when the meeting is?
So it would be like a week from now, I'm sure. Dimitri and Thomas will have something. I mean, one of the key things that came out when we had a conversation earlier the week is we just need more companies involved. So Mike, absolutely hear your request, and so we'll be able to get something out. Like I think deferring until January makes sense because there's no urgency to do this, and some of the technical conversations that we wanted to have, like Aaron wanted to have with Google, we're doing anyway, and we're just kind of going ahead with that, expecting that we're going to roll into an open forum. So yeah, Mike, we'll get something out, and you'll be able to comment. Cool. And I wouldn't be surprised if Thomas and Dimitri decide to have a side call.
That's brilliant. I mean, to be clear, I was kind of dead set against this, and I'm now rather for it. So, well, I'm not dead set against it, but I've had a bit of an epiphany. So, but I want to make sure that there's others. Yeah, let's do it. Good.
So I'm sorry, I had to take a quick call and I missed some of that. But would it be possible for us to set up a Slack channel to start the discussion in around the document that Grant just talked about? That way we can have some asynchronous method other than synchronous phone calls.
Yeah.
Just, we all have very crowded calendars. Synchronous calls are really good for high bandwidth. Iterating on this over the next few weeks or month, I think will be really well facilitated by an asynchronous Slack channel to chat in.
Plus a collaborative document editing.
Yes, plus a document, exactly.
By collaborative document editing, that just means you want it in something like Google Docs, like we were using for the TAC white paper.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Yep, I fully support that.
So what I'm hearing is the proposal on the table is to post something into say Google Docs by next week to kick off a discussion, so that by January, when we put it on a meeting, that people have already had a chance to review it and discuss it and make any updates in an asynchronous fashion. And there's also a request for Stefano to either create or send us what Slack channel to use if we use Slack. Did I get that summary right?
Yes, and the follow-up is, does anybody who wants to participate in this early iteration process not have access to the Slack right now?
There's a Slack.
That's what I was going to say.
I have no idea where it is, but I'm sure I have access to it.
Great.
So if someone could put around where it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't set up my access yet.
It's one of the 15 different channels types that I have access to. That's kind of how I feel about it.
So by next week, then it sounds like we need two things by approximately next week. And again, it's not a hard deadline, but once people start disappearing, right? If you can get it out before people start, disappearing, because we heard a number of people were going to be basically offline before the 17th. If you can get the Google Doc out and the link to the Slack information. And again, those don't both necessarily have to come from you, Grant, although they could, but the Slack information, if you don't have it, would probably have to come from Stefano as to how to join the Slack channel.
Do I have the, yeah, presumably I can set up a Slack channel within the new domain. I just need to take out, did the details of the new Slack, I guess it's called a workspace for the CCC get emailed out? I just haven't looked.
Stefano can help you if needs.
Yeah, I just dropped it into chat, but yeah, so we're gonna do a review just to ensure that everyone's been given a chance to comment on which chat system they'd like to use. In the interim, we did set up a Slack channel so that for the webinar we could all communicate. I've dropped that link into chat. And so I guess order of operations here, I'll let everyone know here are the available options. We have already started using Slack because people need to communicate. Please feel free to try it out. And here are the costs associated with Slack going forward. And then if everyone is okay with that, I would imagine we would just keep going with this Slack instance.
Yes. Okay.
Assuming that they don't look at the other options and say we like that much better.
All right. So it sounds like we have a way forward, at least next steps on the AAA SIG proposal. Okay. Making sure there's no other comments or suggestions on that one. And up on the list of upcoming annual project reviews, NARCS is in the queue for sometime in January. One of the two January meetings, up to when Mike can say that Nathaniel and folks are available to do it. Oh, I guess I should still say, should we still, that was one of the two questions. The other question, should we still meet on December 17th?
No from me.
Or would people be okay with not meeting?
I'm happy to skip.
The first week of January. Let's say, when should our next meeting be? So what's the first Thursday of January? I don't know what's the date there, because like if it's January 1st, that would be a problem. So somebody look up.
I would prefer second week of January.
It's the 7th.
Give me the date.
First week of January.
Or third, like, but not first.
So January 7th, you said was the first Thursday, Mike?
Looks like it.
Yes,
So
that's correct.
we can, so it'd say we're either doing the 7th and the 21st, or we're doing the 14th and the 28th.
14th and 28th then. Let's have a good holiday.
Everybody agree with that? 14th and 28th? Which means we
Yep.
won't see you again for 5 weeks then. All right, just in a month and a week, so. Okay, so January 14th shall be our next meeting. Any objections? Okay. So either the 14th or the 28th are your two choices, Mike, for doing the NARC Sidedoor project review. You can pick between those two and let me know.
Yeah, I need to remember.
Okay. I guess Simon's already dropped off. I don't know,
myself.
Dan Middleton, are you still on the call? You are. Okay, if you can help us figure out what the plan would be to do for the SGX SDK for Linux, because the last time this was reviewed was October 2019. It hasn't made it all the way through the pipeline, and so I'm still looking to you or Simon for a proposal as to what should the TAC do as far as annual project review. Should we keep holding off or do something or what? And so I'm just letting you know that this is still an action item asked on you and Simon to propose what to do here.
Yeah.
Okay. And then lastly, Seth had talked about the webinar series that we wanted to solicit projects and other TAC things for. Not to be confused with that is something that we've talked about in the last meeting or so about a Tech Talk series, which is more inbound than outbound. In other words, information meant for the TAC to review and understand. So it could be, and we've given examples of things, it would be presentations about related work, say IETF standards, or about what homomorphic-encryption.org is doing and how they might make use of confidential computing, or what trustedfirmware.org is doing and how it relates to things the CCC is doing. So inbound series as opposed to outbound series, which is the webinar. There is a potential point of overlap, and I was going to comment in Seth, but I wanted to make sure we had got through the things that we already got through. So just to follow up on the overlap between these, on the board that I've served on before, one of the things that we have done for preparing content for outbound is if we have content that hasn't been reviewed before, or things that, so let's say you have a project presentation from, let's pick somebody, because both NARCs and Open Enclave have already done collateral and presentations to the Open Source Summit that many of us have already seen, right? And so they've already have baked content, and that's why NARCs was kind of first in the queue, because they already have baked content that's been presented multiple times at things like the Open Source Summit that we've seen. But let's say there was going to be, let's say Vera Cruz wanted to get on the list of outbound webinars. Maybe we would do a dry run and review content by having them have a Tech Talk series. And so that's an example of something that we've done. And the other board that I was on, the Internet Architecture board, is we put something on the inbound series to be able to present, and then we say, yeah, this looks great. Make concentrate on the following things, or add the following things, and then we use that as the outbound thing. So that's just another idea of something that could be in the inbound thing, which is the candidates for outbound stuff. So that 6-week lead time, maybe during the advertising time, then we could have a Tech Talk, which is just like the dry run or something for somebody that hasn't done the dry run in a public context before, right? And so, Graphene, Keystone, or whatever, as those complete the pipeline, if we haven't seen public presentations, then that might be another candidate for the Tech Talk series. And so that's something I'd like to set up in January, just like Seth created a way to register for webinar stuff. We wouldn't need to do this in NARCs or Open Enclave because we've already had open source presentations we've kind of already reviewed. But for other ones, those would be examples of other Tech Talk things. And so in January, I'll also put on something about how we might organize that. So that's just a placeholder for an upcoming January discussion. All right, that takes me to the end of any other business unless anybody else has comments or things to bring up. So let me just open it to the floor here. Any other items to discuss? Going once, going twice. Okay, then I will close the call here. Thank you all, and everyone have a good holiday. We will see you next month.
Happy holidays. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Same to you, Dave. Bye, everyone. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.